This is Microeconomics, Chapter 6, Supply, Demand, and Government Policies. If you remember the handout that we had on Chapter 4 with the bicycles, you might recall, from the schedule to the curve, you were building that supply and demand curve. You all came up with the equilibrium price of 300. So at a price of 300 per bike, there was an equilibrium quantity of 50 being sold. Remember that handout? And then it asked you, what if the price was 100 or what if the price was 400? Okay, what happens if the price is too low? Do you remember what problem that leads to? A shortage or surplus? A shortage, because the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. And then do y'all remember, if we have a shortage, what's going to happen to the price? Will there be upward pressure on it or will it be downward? Upward. And then just the opposite when the price is above equilibrium, right? There'll be downward pressure on the price. To get back to equilibrium, if you believe in the invisible hand and market forces. Well, first part of Chapter 6 deals with when the price cannot adjust. So price controls is a general term for when the government comes in and sets some kind of rule. And there are two rules. The first one, which we're going to talk about first, is a price ceiling, and then we'll talk about a price floor next. But this first rule says that we've set a maximum price on something that can be sold. Now, within a price ceiling, it can cause a problem, and the word your author uses for a problem is binding. So if you see that on the test, remember, a binding price ceiling leads to what problem? A shortage, yes. Now, it can also not be a problem. So there are two instances of it, but remember, a price ceiling is like a cap. Nobody can sell it for more than that amount. If the government were to come out with a rule that no gas station in our country can sell for more than $2 a gallon, okay, are they able to sell at $1.50, $1.75, $2.50? No, up to that. That's what a price ceiling is. Okay, what are people going to think when they hear that news? $2 a gallon for gas. Okay, they're all going to fill up. Everybody's going to be really excited about that rule, but then what happens when everybody fills up?
Shortage.
Okay, then it's going to lead to a shortage. If the rule was no one's allowed to sell gas for more than $10 a gallon, nobody's allowed to sell gas for more than $10 a gallon, y'all can see why no one would really care about that rule. It wouldn't have any impact because the equilibrium price is about $3.30, something like that right now. And that rule is so high, it's like when we were buying and selling that toy truck in here. If I said nobody's allowed to sell for more than $100, y'all would say, okay, and just shrug your shoulders and just ignore that rule because that price is so high that it wouldn't have an impact. Okay, so that's just basically the definitions and conceptually what we're talking about here. But Figure 1 shows graphs of what we were just talking about. Panel A shows a price ceiling that is not binding. Again, our equilibrium price for the toy trucks in here was about we're so close, like $10.25 or something like that. $10.25. So if I had a rule, nobody's allowed to sell for more than $100. Remember, a price ceiling is the maximum, so we're allowed to charge everything up to that price. We're not allowed above it. If equilibrium is in the area that we're allowed to get to, it's okay. It's not going to be binding because, again, if I had that rule, nobody's allowed to sell for more than $100. Well, sellers, y'all could have called out $99, $98, staying underneath that rule, but you'd figure out in a couple of seconds that nobody had enough to pay for a $99 truck, right? And then that interaction between buyers and sellers would get us back down to equilibrium. So this is a picture of a non-binding price ceiling. On panel B, we've got a binding price ceiling. So here, our price ceiling, this is for ice creams, is $2. Are sellers in this market allowed to sell $1 ice cream cones?
Yes.
$1.50?
Yes.
$5? Not allowed. Now, I mean, the real question is, can they sell for $3? Because that's the equilibrium market clearing price, right? And they can't, because if this is the cap, this is the ceiling, that's the limit. There's a government rule that's been imposed. Now, we've seen this graph before. You drew it on a handout of Chapter 4 when you were looking at those bicycles. When you were answering the question, what if the price of bicycles was $100? You said there would be a shortage, because at that low price of 100, here's where it hits supply, and demand's way over here. We've got excess demand, so that's a shortage. But you also said in that answer on your bicycles handout that the price would be able to adjust upwards to get closer to equilibrium and eliminate that shortage. Here we've got a government rule, and by law, we can't go above it. So now we've got a persistent shortage caused by a binding price ceiling. If it helps you, you can think of a little person hitting their head on the ceiling and they cannot go above it. And this is actually what happened, an example of what happened in 1973. OPEC raised the price of crude oil. Who knows what OPEC stands for? Or who knows what they are?
Old people eliminating our cash.
No?
Oh yeah, that's the oil companies.
The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries.
So they're old people eliminating our cash.
Libya, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, those countries that produce crude oil, which, as you all know, is an input to gasoline. And when there's an increase in the price of an input, what does that do to the supply of a product? Shift it to the right or to the left? So this is like our sugar shortage for ice cream. If sugar's more expensive, are we able to produce as much ice cream as before? No. It's going to shift the supply of gasoline to the left. Now, they restricted production. That's what they did. And that's what originally raised the price of crude oil, which then affected gas prices, which then our government came in and said, that is not okay. We need to protect consumers. We're going to set a cap. We're going to set a price ceiling on gas prices. Again, when I said if the government were to set a rule tomorrow, a maximum of $2 per gallon, that would sound really nice. The intention is to help the consumer. It's just that it's going to lead to other problems. And that's exactly what happened. We had really long lines. Gas stations were only open certain days of the week. People were getting into fights about who was at the pump first. Okay, so this is the before scenario. Before OPEC decided to restrict production on anything. This is the before scenario, panel A. The price ceiling of gasoline is not binding because if the equilibrium price is below, we're able to charge anything up to the price ceiling. We're not allowed up here. Remember, imagine a little person's head right here hitting the ceiling. They can go below. Can they still get to equilibrium? If their head's over here, yes. It's not going to be binding over here. Now, on panel B, this shows the before scenario in the blue lines. Now, when OPEC decides to restrict production of crude oil, it's going to raise prices, and that's increase in the input price of gasoline. So here is gasoline's supply curve before and after. Our old equilibrium's here. Now our new equilibrium is way up here, above the price ceiling. And that's why in panel B the price ceiling is going to be binding. Because remember, this is our maximum. We can charge up to it, but not over it. Can we ever get to equilibrium? No. And so we've got this persistent shortage. The intention was to try to help consumers, but it actually led to other problems, in this case, a shortage. Another example of a price ceiling is rent control. There's a really strong statement in the text. There's an economist saying, other than by bombing a city, this is the really easy way to ruin a city. Well, let's think about why he would say such a thing. Okay, how much do y'all pay for a one-bedroom apartment in Waco?
600.
Okay, maybe 500, 600. If you probably live a little closer to Baylor campus, a little more expensive. And they've got some really nice lofts and things downtown, which are even more than 700. But let's just say, for example, $500, $600. If the city of Waco said that's too expensive, we need to make housing more affordable for our citizens here in the city, and made rent for a one-bedroom apartment, no apartment complex is allowed to charge more than $300 per month for a one-bedroom apartment. Okay, it sounds really nice, right? Are there going to be more people demanding, or be more demand for one-bedroom apartments? Absolutely. Okay, what's going to happen?
No one's going to move out of houses.
Yeah, absolutely. Look what your author's saying. Supply and demand for housing is relatively inelastic in the short run, because if the city of Waco made that rule tomorrow, we have a limited supply, right as of right now, of one-bedroom apartments in this city, right? Now, next year or 2 years later, in the long run, when they have enough time to add on and build some more one-bedroom units, they can do that. But right now, we've got a limited supply. That's what inelastic supply is talking about. And in terms of more people could move in, if we're just talking about the people who are living here right now in Waco, relatively inelastic. We are going to see a shortage, just like we did with gasoline. But even in the long run, even if we have time for some adjustments, for people to move in, for landlords to maybe build some more units, well, let's just think about there's still going to be some adverse effects. First of all, if you're the landlord and you're used to getting, $600 of rent per one-bedroom unit, are you going to be as happy with $300? Are you going to be as responsive when someone tells you that they see a mouse in their apartment? Or going to be as responsive when they say this carpet is really ratty and needs to be changed, or the paint's peeling off the walls? So, when you take away the rationing mechanism of price, okay, rationing means deciding who gets what, right? What decides who gets one-bedroom apartments right now? The deciding factor. Okay, credit. But if you can pay for it, right? If you have the money to pay for it, you take that away, and your authors say there's going to have to be some other rationing mechanism because we have a limited supply. And there's not going to be that much incentive for landlords to keep building more one-bedroom units if they know they're only going to get, half of what they're used to getting for it in terms of monthly rent. So we might see some of these things. Really long waiting lists, preference to certain groups of people. Maybe if you don't have kids, maybe if you don't have pets, maybe if you're of a certain race, or maybe if you give me enough money, if you give the landlord enough money under the table, and they start taking bribes. And all of that is against the law, and so then we would need the government to come in and make sure that that stuff is not happening, which takes more time and effort and money. And so you can see why your author is saying this is not such a good idea. Price controls are not such a good idea, even though we're trying to help. Okay, figure 3 shows that we've got a relatively inelastic demand curve in panel A and inelastic supply. We've just got a certain number of units right now of one-bedroom units. And if you've got that rent control that's below the equilibrium price, you've got a shortage, and it's just going to get worse in the long run. even if apartments, well, yeah, it's just going to get worse in the long run. Do you have everything on this side? Yeah, okay. Oops. The other type of price control, besides price ceilings, are price floors, and this is just the opposite. It's a minimum price that we can sell at. And we use this with agricultural products. You could argue that farming is an American institution, that better technology is replacing a lot of farmers' jobs. We don't have as many farmers as before, and so we need to help out farmers, maybe, so they don't lose their farms. So this is that's the reasoning behind why we have agricultural supports. But a price floor is a minimum at which the farmer can sell their product as, because we're wanting to make sure that they have a certain amount per bushel of wheat, for example, that they can bring home. Now, with price floors, just like price ceilings, they can be binding or not binding. Okay, binding means what again? You see that on the test? There's a problem and we can't get to equilibrium. And in this case, it's going to cause a surplus. With a price ceiling, the binding constraint causes a shortage. Remember? So it can be not binding or binding. Take a look at the next slide here. Okay, thinking back in terms of our experiment that we did together, our toy trucks, our equilibrium price was about $10.25 and sold about 5. What if I had a rule that was way below our equilibrium price? What if I said no seller, or what if I said the rule is that every seller who sells a truck has to get at least $1. Okay, the minimum price that you're going to pay for your truck is $1.
It would be irrelevant because,
Right, nobody would care.
right,
That price floor is so low that it would not have any effect, because y'all would say, okay, and then just keep going and get closer and closer to $10.25 with your interaction. Now, if I said nobody's allowed to sell their truck for less than $15, sellers, y'all would be really happy about it, right? I think there are about 5 of you. I stopped y'all at about 5. But how many, raise your hands, how many of y'all would have taken $15 for a truck, would have been happy with that? Okay, see several hands. So instead of just 5 of you being willing and able to sell at $10.25, the quantity supply would have been greater. Okay, so let's just pretend it would have been 7. Okay, buyers, how many of you would have been willing and able to buy a truck for $15? Okay. Now, 5 of you were willing and able to buy for $10.25, but the quantity demanded is going to be way less at this high price, right? And we're going to see a persistent surplus of leftover trucks that people aren't going to be able to buy. Okay, I told you we do this with agricultural products. What does this look like in real life with wheat? We've got a surplus of wheat or apples or oranges. What's going to happen?
they're going to go bad.
Absolutely. And so you can see that economists say this is really inefficient. We should just leave it up to the market to clear, and we don't have any shortages and surpluses, and that's the best way to allocate resources. Another example of a price floor is the minimum wage. Was anyone working at minimum wage when it was $5.15? Okay, I worked study student then at $5.15, and now it's $7.25, as you all know. All right, price floor. You can pay people $10, $20 an hour, right? You can't pay people $3 an hour or $5 an hour. I know if you work at a restaurant or if you're wait staff, that's different. But other than that, have to abide by minimum wage. In the labor market, remember back to chapter 2, we were talking about the factors of production. Workers supply labor, we sell that. So we usually associate ourselves as consumers with the demand curve, but now you've got to think of a worker in the labor market as being part of the supply curve. And then firms, now we associate them with the demand for labor since they're hiring us. Okay, well, what did we say? A binding minimum wage leads to a surplus. What does a surplus in the labor market mean?
Unemployment.
Unemployment. That's right. Unemployment. And it tends to be, it seems kind of counterintuitive. We all want people to have a higher standard of living, have more money. It's just that when you do it by raising minimum wage, it's not like when you raise it from $5.15 to $7.25, it's not like the government gives businesses that $2 extra to pay each one of their workers per hour, right? Where's that money going to come from?
They're going to raise the price.
Okay, they may try to raise the price, but then you already know with inelasticity and elasticity, maybe consumers will be okay with that higher price or maybe not. But that leads to unemployment. Okay, so your author sums up by this portion of the chapter by saying that markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity, but prices are really what's best. And that governments can sometimes improve market outcomes. We said that in chapter 1, but we've seen in this chapter 6 that sometimes governments can cause more problems. When the whole intention was to try to help, they can actually hurt some. And so your author says, instead of messing up the whole market, we can target those who we want to help with maybe rent subsidies or vouchers or wage subsidies or tax credits and just help them. Okay, let's take a break. This is a good place to stop. This is the first half of chapter 6.